He was the first and only Roman Catholic priest to be executed in U.S. history. Hi guys, welcome back to All Things Jira, and I'm back with another story. Now this story is about Hans Schmidt. Before I get into the story, make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel, and please share it. The beginning of this story takes place in Bavaria. Hans was born in 1881 in Bavaria. Hans's mother and father had 9 children. Now it was said that his father didn't even want to be bothered with learning the children's names, so he called them by number, 1 being oldest and 9 being the youngest. It was said that his father was very abusive to all of the children, and specifically Hans. It seemed as if he targeted him more than the other children. Now the father would say that the mother was at fault for how the children were raised because she pushed her Catholicism on them, and he would eventually say that that ruined Hans. So relatives would say that Hans was disturbed from a very young age. He really had a fascination with blood and dismemberment. He would actually go to the local slaughterhouse and watch them slaughter the animals. His family owned geese. Well, I believe they lived on the farm. There were geese on the farm that I believe the geese specifically belonged to his mom. And it was said by relatives that Hans took 2 of the geese and beheaded them, and he would keep their heads in his pocket. One childhood story that I kind of took note of was that when he beheaded the geese, his father later figured out what happened. They couldn't find the geese. They were looking all over for them. Then they found the geese beheaded. And then he noticed that Hans had blood on his pants, and he realized it was coming from something in his pocket. He wasn't near him. He wasn't really near him at the time, but apparently Hans had took these geese heads out of his pocket and were chasing his sister around with the heads. So she's running around, he's chasing the sister, and the dad, grabbed hold of Hans and was about to beat him, and the mom stepped in and said that, whatever was happening was completely normal, that boys harass their sisters and torture their sisters in this type of way, and that he shouldn't be beat for it, basically. So although Hans was really into morbid things like watching animals be slaughtered and beheading geese, he really had a deep religious background as well. His Protestant side and the Catholic side from his mom. And he would also play as a child and pretend to be a priest, and he even made a homemade altar that he would play on. It was also said that he was very promiscuous. It was said that he was bisexual, and that his first homosexual experience was with his older brother Carl. Now I couldn't find whether this was a consensual situation, whether he was raped by Carl or whether he raped Carl. I could not figure that out. Now, him being promiscuous and bisexual, this was really conflicting for him because, like I said, on one hand, he had all these disturbing issues. He was also religious, and he was also promiscuous and bisexual. All that together, that does not work. So other than the situation with Hans and his older brother Carl, I couldn't find any other information stating that any of the other siblings had any type of mental health issues. Despite his mental health issues, he really kept the promiscuity and being bisexual. He kept that to himself. Most people did not know about it. His father did suggest that he knew about some situations with Carl and one of his friends when they were young boys, but he never told anyone else about it. So despite Hans's issues, he was ordained as a Catholic priest in 1904. He said he was ordained by Saint Elizabeth herself. He said she came into his room one night while he was praying, and that she was surrounded by lights, and that she ordained him as a Catholic priest. But truly, he was ordained the following day by the senior priest in his church. Now, he never told anyone about seeing Saint Elizabeth in his room that night. He said if he did, they would only tease him and pick on him. And he said they teased him for things like this all the time. So clearly he had continuing mental health issues, and he was discussing the things that he saw with other people, and they teased him about it. So after a while, he just started to keep things to himself when he saw something or heard something. And he had parish assignments in different churches in Bavaria. While he was at all of these different assignments, he would molest altar boys. He would have affairs with the women in churches. He would entertain sex workers. he was never actually priestly. So because people would find out about these things that he did, he would move from parish to parish. Instead of taking him out of the priesthood and banning him from churches and banning him from working as a priest, they would just send him from one church to another church. It wasn't until people started to complain about his sermons, they said that they were really eccentric. I couldn't find specific information about what he would say. But once parishioners started to complain about his sermons, then he was banned from the churches in Bavaria. He was actually suspected of killing a young woman named Paz. She was said to be a telephone operator. Now, her body was found on a local farm close to the farm his family lived on. And this was also close to a place that him and a childhood friend would play back when they were younger. Now, his father heard about the suspicions on Hans. The police had not approached him yet. So his father went to Hans and told him, the police suspect you did this. And basically his father was pretty sure he did it as well. So he said to him, he didn't want his family to be disgraced by what Hans had done, by an arrest or a trial for this. He gave Hans some money and put him on a boat and sent him to the U.S. Now, one of the last things that he said to Hans was, I'm giving you this money, go to the U.S., start a new life. He told him that, he wasn't doing it for Hans, he was doing it for himself and his family. He said that this would be the last thing that he ever gave him, and that would be the last time that they ever spoke. He also told Hans to change his name when he got to the U.S. So with the police possibly coming after Hans for this murder, he fled to the U.S. in 1909 with the money that his father gave him. He was assigned to a parish in Kentucky. He was assigned to a church in Kentucky. He was there for a while, but he had an argument with the senior priest and he was sent to a church in New York. Again, instead of, taking his priesthood away or whatever you do, they just sent him to another church. So while he was on this assignment at the church in New York, he met a woman. Her name was Anna A. Mueller. And this is in 1912. He met Anna A. Mueller because she was a housekeeper at the church that he was assigned to. Hans claimed that God told him to love Anna. So he approached her and initially she refused him. She didn't want to deal with him at all. But he kept approaching her and talking to her, and eventually she gave in. They started a sexual relationship, but Anna did not know that Hans was also in a relationship with a male dentist named Ernest. Now, he and Ernest had a counterfeit business going on, and they had an apartment where they set up a printing press and they would counterfeit $10 bills. Later, Hans would say that he enjoyed the company of Ernest much more than he did Anna. I don't know why, but in 1913, he was transferred to a church in Manhattan. Now, despite the distance between the two churches, him and Anna kept their relationship going, and eventually Anna got pregnant. Once Anna said she was pregnant, Hans and Anna got married. Now, this was illegal because it wasn't a legitimate marriage. There was no real marriage certificate or ceremony. Hans did the ceremony himself. And because Hans was a priest, he wasn't supposed to be in a relationship with anyone. He definitely wasn't supposed to get married or have a baby. So all of this was illegal. So after this wedding, they pretended to be a legitimate married couple and they went and got an apartment together. Hans also told Anna that he was going to leave the priesthood for her and the baby and that they were all going to live together. But he really had no plans on actually doing this. He knew that having this baby was going to cause problems. He was a priest. Like I said, he wasn't supposed to have a family like this. He was supposed to be working the priesthood. That was supposed to be his lifetime service. So there was no way he could allow this baby to be born because then everybody would know what he had really been doing. At some point, Hans and Anna had sex on the altar at the church he was working at. And he said that afterwards, he heard from God and God told him to sacrifice Anna. Now, he told Anna this, and all she said to him was that he was crazy. Hans returned home, and Anna was asleep. While she was asleep, he slashed her throat. While she was bleeding to death, Hans started to drink some of her blood, and he raped her until she bled to death. Once she was dead, he cut off her head with a hacksaw, and he cut her body in half. I believe it was also said that he cut smaller pieces out of that bottom half of her body. He wrapped her body parts in newspaper and he put her lower limbs in a pillowcase. Now, this pillowcase was actually monogrammed with Anna's initials on it. Now he threw her remains in the Hudson River, and afterwards he just went right back to church and proceeded with giving communion to the parishioners. I'm not sure how long it took, but Anna's remains started to wash up on the shore in New Jersey. Based on the remains that were found, they were able to tell that she was a woman under 30, that she was about 5'4", between 120 pounds and 130 pounds, and she had prematurely given birth prior to her death. Now, there was a price tag inside the pillowcase that Hans had put her body parts in. Based on this price tag, they were able to figure out that this pillowcase was made in a factory in Newark. Luckily, this factory only sold to a specific furniture shop in Manhattan. So they go to the furniture shop in Manhattan and they spoke to the owner. The owner couldn't remember exactly how many pillowcases he had sold, but he went through his receipts and he found a receipt for pillowcases, a mattress, a box spring, and I believe a bed set. He also noted that the pillowcases had been monogrammed and they were signed for by A. Van Dyke. Now, there was an address associated with this receipt, so they went to that address. Now, they spoke to the super in that building, and the super said that the address was for a married couple. The super noted that the husband had a very heavy German accent. So they did a stakeout on the apartment. They were on a stakeout for 3 days, but for that 3 days, no one came or went. Eventually, they broke into the apartment and started to check everything out. When they got into the apartment, they noticed that the floors had been scrubbed pretty recently. There was a lot of dried blood on the walls, and there was a blood-stained knife on one of the kitchen counters. There was also clothing in the apartment, and there was A. Van Dyke stitched inside the lining of the clothes. They looked through the mail. They saw a lot of mail for A. Van Dyke. They also saw mail to Hans Schmidt, and it was from Anna. They noted that Anna's address on that mail was, of course, different from the address that they were at. So they went to that return address. When they got there, the super there told them that Anna had moved out a little while after getting a job working for that church. So they went to the church to see if they could locate Anna. When they got there, they were met by the senior priest, and the senior priest spoke to them to figure out what it was that they needed, who they were looking for, and the senior priest took them to Hans. So as soon as he saw the police, he started to yell, "I killed her. I killed her because I loved her, and sacrifices must be consummated in blood." So immediately, they arrested him and charged him with first-degree murder. Now, he was tried twice for this. With the first trial, his lawyers tried to get him off on an insanity plea. They had several doctors come up, but all those doctors determined that he was actually sane. Despite this, the jury could not come to a decision, so it was a hung jury. His second trial started about 2 weeks later. With his second trial, the defense didn't bother going with the insanity plea, and the prosecutors kind of warned the jury not to let this trial go the same way that the first one did. He basically told them, "We have the knife. We know what he did with it. We know what he intended to do. We know why he put her body in, wrapped her body up and put her in these pillowcases, and why he put her in the river. There's no reason you should not find him guilty." And that's essentially what they did. They found him guilty and they sentenced him to be executed. Of course, his legal team wanted to appeal this, and they tried several times and they were all denied. Now, after the appeals were denied, Hans admitted to faking insanity for his first trial. But now he was saying that he didn't kill Anna. He said that Ernest killed Anna and that he was simply covering for Ernest. Despite saying all of that, Hans was executed in Sing Sing prison on February 18th, 1916. After he was executed, they suspected him of several crimes. They found his apartment with the counterfeit machine, the business that he ran with Ernest. I'm not sure if they found Ernest or if they arrested Ernest for this, but they found all the evidence for that business. He was also suspected of killing a 9-year-old girl in the church that he worked in Kentucky. Her body was found burned and buried in the basement of the church that he worked at. It was said that he had tried to dismember her, but he wasn't successful, so he simply buried her in the church. And then, like I said previously, he was suspected in killing the girl in Bulgaria before he fled. So what do you think about this story? Clearly, Hans was crazy. Clearly, he had some issues. Like I said, I couldn't find out whether any of his other siblings had issues as well. But what do you think about him? What do you think about them simply moving him from church to church rather than arresting him, or, you know, seeing that he got the help that he needed? Maybe all of these things could have been avoided if they hadn't have just moved him from church to church instead of doing something about it. And what do you think about Anna just staying after he told her that God told him to sacrifice her? You know, once he tells you this, I wouldn't have stayed with him. I couldn't have done it. But so why do you think Anna didn't take him seriously? Anyway, what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. This was my story for today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys. Make sure you like my video, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends, please. Thank you guys so much. I will see you all again next Wednesday at 10:15. Bye.